So, here we are. Star Wars, Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. It's the final entry in the the latest Star Wars trilogy, which brings everything to an end. So this has been a pretty long journey here. We started off with The Force Awakens, where we were introduced to our new characters of Rey and Poe and Finn, and they were going to go on an adventure to stop the evil Kylo Ren from trying to control the galaxy with the First Order. We were introduced to them in The Force Awakens, and then in The Last Jedi, we learned more about their past, and then we shook the cages of like the Jedi mythos and everything that it is to be Star Wars. And now we come to The Rise of Skywalker, the big final conclusion to everything that's been built up here. And I'm a little bit troubled by this film for a few reasons. One is because I don't want to put too much blame on director J.J. Abrams here, because he's returning here to direct after having directed The Force Awakens, and he brings kind of like the same stuff to the table that we've kind of been used to him bringing to franchise properties. Like, you might remember, he's also done 2 entries within the new Star Trek when he brought that back. And I'll say this, having seen, his 2 Star Trek films and now his 2 Star Wars films, I think he's great at setting up franchises to build on something new. But then I think he needs to let go of them and let them go off into the world with new directors and new visions to kind of build on that stuff. Because here, unfortunately, with Episode 9, Rise of the Skywalker, it just kind of feels like we're going back to building up more again, when we should be, building on what's already here to a great conclusion. Instead, Abrams decides to build more stuff up here. It's kind of like, the big event is about to happen here with the final conclusion, and this film is still kind of like setting up all the chairs and still trying to, put up like the last bit. It's like, no, we have to wrap this up. This is like the last entry. This is the last adventure. It's like, no, wait, hang on. I gotta tack a few more things up on here. It's like, come on, we got so much that's been built up over these past 2 films. We've got to build something with it. So without getting into too many spoilers, and this will be a spoiler-free review, we essentially catch up with where the Resistance has been at the last time. They're still trying to lick their wounds and build up their forces and fight against the First Order. So Rey is still trying to come to terms with her abilities and her connection to the Force, once again played by Daisy Ridley, and she's still struggling. She hasn't quite come to terms with what it means to be a Jedi. She's still in that phase of trying to decide how much of her past can connect her to what she wants with her future. It's the same deal with Kylo Ren, once again played by Adam Driver. Kylo is still conflicted about his past. You might remember in The Last Jedi, he was talking about how, if the past isn't, if the past seems horrible, just get rid of it, kill it, and not to learn from it. But he's kind of conflicted now about where he wants to go now that he has a certain amount of power. It feels like he needs something more, that there's something he has to come to terms with. And then we catch up with Finn and Poe. Of course, Finn is once again played by John Boyega, and Poe is once again played by Oscar Isaacs. And they're still present. They're still trying to find stuff to do within this adventure, and they do have some stuff to do. But I guess this is kind of the problem with especially the first act of The Rise of Skywalker, is that it's introducing so much new material and story elements within this final film that it's in such a rush to cover it all. It seemed like, it always felt like with Star Wars, when we had the opening title crawl, it was always meant to, show off all the exposition and just get it out of the way. It's like, okay, here's your 3 paragraphs of where the heroes and the villains are at, and we'll just zoom right into the story from there. I think they might have, I think they should have gotten John Williams to make a longer score for the opening here, because there's quite a bit of exposition they dump in the first act here. And I think that really kind of hurts the film, because like, consider this. This is like within the first act. The one thing I really do love about the first act is that it's the first time in a while we've gotten to see Poe and Finn and Rey all together and actually having some camaraderie and some back and forth, and that was fun. Like I was like, okay, I like how what they're setting up here, but the thing is, they're so busy, and this goes the same for Kylo Ren as well. Everyone is so busy with the mission, trying to find like the next clue, the next MacGuffin, the next person they got to track down, the next bit of information they got to seek. There's a spy, so they've got to figure out what information that person has. And there's such like a rush to get to all this stuff that we don't have time for some of the fun moments that you want in an adventure. Like, because when I think back to, like The Empire Strikes Back, what I love so much about that film isn't just that Han Solo and Leia were escaping from the Empire and running around asteroids and stuff like that. I like the tension that they had between each other when they were hiding out in the asteroid. That was probably one of my favorite scenes within that film. We don't get a lot of that here because everyone is in such a rush that it feels like there's not a lot of time to appreciate everything that's happening here. And there are some fun parts of the film to explore with this. Like there's a great section where all of like Rey, Poe, and Finn all go to a planet to find like, the next clue they need to be on their way with their adventure. And they meet some colorful locals and they have a fun little adventure through tunnels and they encounter a serpent and there's some great little gags they make with like the lightsaber and some brilliant back and forth. I gotta tell you, this is some of, if anything, I do like the dialogue here for C-3PO. He has some of like the best back and forth here than I think I've seen in any other film. He kind of steals the show as more of the comic relief here, and I kind of enjoyed that. But the thing about this is like I kept wanting this film to build on the more thematic elements that had been set up within The Last Jedi, and I think the film kind of like forgets a lot of it, and I don't just mean in like, people have talked about this already about like the whole, there's been some stuff that's either been retooled or retconned from the previous film. I don't really hold that as, for as much as I like The Last Jedi, I don't hold that as much accountable here because like, okay, if you do want to do retcons, I'm okay with that. I mean, Star Wars, we're always, the directors and different writers are always tinkering with it and always trying to restructure it however they want. I'm okay with that, as long as something can build more upon it. As long as it can touch on the stuff that I like about Star Wars, which isn't just about, who is within which line of like families and stuff like that. Stuff that they would crowd Wikipedia articles. I really don't care who is the father or the granddaughter or the grandfather or who connects with what character within the timeline, whatever. I just care about if there's like a greater theme of like, heroes and villains and coming to terms with yourself and sort of the philosophical leanings of like the Jedi. And all that stuff is present within the Rise of Skywalker. But I feel like there's so much going on that we really can't appreciate. It feels like, and I guess this goes for the film in general, it's in such a rush to cover so much ground and wrap up so many story arcs that it feels like we don't have a lot of time to get to all of it, especially for a film that runs 142 minutes. You would think there'd be some time to sort of slow down. That being said, I will say my favorite scenes in the film were between Rey and Kylo Ren. Obviously, they had the strongest scenes together in The Last Jedi, where they both connected and tried to find ways that they connected as both being Jedi and both being troubled by their histories and about where they want to go next in their life. I like the way they connect there and how they like show off just how much they can do with their Force powers and how much they represent for like the next generation and having this fear about what they can become. And so like there's aside from just like, the big like shocking soap opera style reveals they do of Rey's past and Kylo Ren's connection to the Sith and all that and all these big secrets they reveal. I like how they and it feels kind of like they're repeating some of the stuff they already had in The Last Jedi. I do like how how they're both like trying to come to terms with the ghosts of their past, and try to find a means of, you know, stepping forward into the future and sort of casting aside and rejecting evil, or trying to find a way to reject evil, but also destroy evil as well. Like if I had to like split up the three different trilogies we've had so far, I'd say that like episode 1 through 3 is about being seduced by evil. Episodes 4 through 6 was about rejecting evil. And I think episodes 7 through 9, at least taking them all into a whole, it seems like episodes 7 through 9 is about destroying evil. Like, you know, realizing its temptation, casting it aside, and then finally combating it. Because I do like this element of how, like, Rey is a character who feels constantly bombarded and afflicted by her past, and trying to decide, which path does she want to go with it. I mean, it's interesting because it kind of crosses over with, with the same way that, Luke is trying to figure out how to go to like the next stage of being a Jedi, and deciding which path is more applicable. I think it's more interesting because, like, if you go back and like compare like the trilogies, there's this fascination with emotions. Like, Anakin was taught to deny his emotions, and as a result, they bubbled up and they consumed him. And with Luke Skywalker's story, it almost seemed like his ideal was to reject emotion again so that he wouldn't give in to anger and sort of become more at peace. And it feels like Rey is somewhere in between there, where we're trying to establish her as someone who can accept emotion, but also not give in to like the bad ones as well. It's kind of been like a weird emotional journey so far. There are a few cameos in the film, not just like the obvious ones that we've seen in the trailers. There are a few more surprises, but they're so kind of like underutilized, where like, like the fact that they do show up is kind of a surprise, but there are certain scenes they set up like, oh, okay, we're gonna show this character, all right. They're kind of a surprise, but in terms of like how much they're used and what these returning characters are used for, not really that surprising here. This film, like I said, this film crams a lot in here that it honestly doesn't have a lot of room for the characters to do much of anything. Like, y'all remember from The Force Awakens, the character of Maz? The little squat character with like, the big goggles. She had a thing for Chewie. She knew a little bit about Jedi. She knew a little bit about code breakers. She provided some information in The Last Jedi. She was kind of a cool character. Well, in this film, she basically narrates all the actions of General Leia. It's like, why? why do we even need her? She's not going to do too much in here. The obvious answer is because they're trying to cram as much into this as possible so that they can have, so everyone's accounted for, so that by the time we get to the end of the film, we have that big post-battle, hug fest where everyone's like, we finally did it, we succeeded, and everyone's together again. Now, of course, yes, because it's the final film, this is kind of like a tradition of Star Wars at this point. You have the big battle, and yes, you do have a huge, massive battle. The same kind that we've got at the end of every third trilogy closer. Like, we've, like, at the end of Return of the Jedi, we had the big Death Star battle with all the different ships and the armadas, attacking each other. In Revenge of the Sith, we opened with the big battle. And here, once again, we closed with another big battle, plenty of Star Destroyers and hundreds of ships just crowding the screen and blowing each other up. But it kind of feels... There's something weird about, like, I mean, it feels standard. We kind of expect it from Star Wars at this point, that we've got to end on like a big battle. Like, sure, we get the big battle here. I will say this, there is some interesting stuff. I do like the fact that at one point they've got to land on a Star Destroyer with essentially space horses to ride across it and basically shoot down stormtroopers and like a beacon or whatever. That stuff is unique. There are a lot of great settings here that I like. I love the fact that we go to the planet where this armada is residing at is this big, dark, and gloomy planet with lightning constantly going, constantly hidden in darkness and shadow with little bits of light coming in between there. I like the way it's set up, but at the same time, I kept thinking, there's a lot of neat visuals here. I like the fact that they kind of dig up some parts of the past. We go to like a few familiar planets. We explore just a little bit more of each of them, just a little bit, not a lot. But I can't help but feeling, I kind of like The Last Jedi more, just from like a visual standpoint, and especially from what those visuals represented. Like, by far, the most iconic part of this new Star Wars trilogy has been the scene where Rey and Kylo face off against like the guards in the giant red throne room. That scene, just awesome. I rewatched that scene a few days ago. It still holds up. It packs a great punch. It's surprising. It's thrilling. It says a lot about the characters and about them questioning what they're gonna do when this fight ends and where their allegiances lie. It was exciting. Within this film, it feels like we're trying to get to like the inevitable wrap up, and it feels like there comes a point where when we're almost like through like the third act, where I kind of realized, okay, this is where the story is going to go here. This is like the logical, safe route for the story to take, especially for one that's about holding up the Jedi to go into like the next generation. It makes sense, but at the same time, it doesn't really hold a lot of suspense there when you kind of know it's coming there, because that's the thing. Like, I think maybe it's because like fan theories have kind of destroyed what expectations are for like a film like this. But I will say this: I've actually talked with a few people who have had fan theories about it, and I was surprised by how many of them are kind of confirmed. There's nothing all that like shocking. And I know for a lot of people, they'll think like, oh, good, there's not going to be anything that's, like shocking or going to be out of the ordinary. It's like, yeah, but at the same time, don't you want something to be a little bit more surprising? Especially for like the last entry in the saga. I feel like it should pack like a big, huge punch, of big reveals and big showdowns. And it feels like it's not quite there. I mean, it's not that I didn't fully hate this film. There are some fun parts to it. I did like some of the banter. For as much exposition that's just like doled out in the first act, there are some funny little bits in between here. I liked some of the back and forth. There's a few neat little visual gags here. There's a few more interesting weird little characters they weave into the background here that I thought were kind of neat. But there's so many like these more interesting thematic elements that I feel like are just kind of like glazed over. In particular, I like how Rey is trying to. They don't outright say this in the film, which I'm kind of glad, because it feels like everything else is just outright stated. It feels like Rey is trying to embrace kind of more the philosophy that Luke Skywalker had of trying to be a Jedi in tune with the Force, but trying to use it for non-violent means, like trying to find a way to combat the First Order without just directly being violent. So I like the fact that she's more or less kind of trying to use her Force powers to sort of bring more life into the universe rather than just destroy it. And I thought this was a very interesting aspect. It's not very much explored. It's kind of harped on in just a little bit in a few scenes here and there. But I found that interesting, because it felt like Rey was trying to find a balance between coming to terms with your emotions and also trying to use the Jedi philosophy for something good, instead of just like defeating evil. Because if I don't know, like I keep going back to like, because this is the last of a trilogy of trying to like compare all three. It felt like like the first three films, episodes 1 through 3 were about evil, and 4 through 6 were about good versus evil, and it feels like 7 through 9 is just about embracing good. So I think that's like my second take on how I think all these trilogies connect together. There's a lot of adventure aspects here that I think connect well, but I think I enjoyed more just like connecting where Rey and Kylo's journey ends, with everything that came before it, more than what comes about in this film. Because on paper, there's a lot of like interesting thematic elements that I love that are set up in The Rise of Skywalker, but not really but not really too taken advantage of. I kept feeling like I was just waiting for like that one scene to just blow me out of the water. Like there were two in The Last Jedi. There was the lightsaber fight in the throne room, and the Holdo maneuver where her starship just smashed through the Armada. Those two scenes are just breathtaking. Actually, kind of like no. I'll say three. The showdown between Kylo and Luke I thought was pretty badass too. Visually, it looked stunning. It's not to say there aren't a few stunning elements to this film, but it feels I don't know. There's nothing that really stuck out hugely. There's a few interesting scenes. Like I do like the fact that at one point they go to a certain star system that has tidal waves that kind of go more up than down. So kind of, I mean, we kind of saw that kind of stuff in like Interstellar. So I feel like I've kind of seen those elements before. They look nice. It makes for a pretty cool lightsaber battle between Kylo and Rey, which does pack a little bit of a punch. Like I said, any scene between Kylo Ren and Rey, I think work really well. And those are the best parts of the film by far. Where I feel the film is kind of weak, it's just when we get into like the big battle towards the end. Like it feels, like I said, it feels fairly standard. I also wish there was more for Poe and Finn to do. It feels more like, instead of like having established the relationships that they already have with the other characters that we've come to know from this point, we just throw even more characters into the mix here, which I would be fine with if the film took some time, and by time I don't just mean like one scene, which is what they do for most of these characters. They give them like one scene to connect with their past. And while I do appreciate we do get to learn more about Poe, we do get to learn more about Finn, we do get to see a connection they have to the past, but not much more than that, which is kind of sad. I was kind of wishing for Finn to have some more concerns about, fighting for the Resistance, because it kind of felt like in The Last Jedi he was questioning his place within the Resistance and how it affected the First Order and what his place was in the world. Same kind of goes with Poe. I liked how, like in the Last Jedi, Poe is established as this person who realizes that, his kind of like cowboyish, brash antics can't always save the day, and that he's got to think like a little bit more logically. But it feels like in between those two films, they just kind of learned everything they needed to learn, and now they're just kind of adventure companions for the rest of it. I don't know. I was hoping for more here. You have a few new additions to the cast, which are kind of interesting. You have Kerry Russell, essentially playing a kind of like a masked bounty hunter. Cool looking, but not much more to her character than that. Interesting choice having Richard E. Grant as a new general within the First Order, but like I said, not much done with him either. It's just kind of he shows up and it's just Richard E. Grant doing his best to hold back a smile, because he's known for his wicked little smiles. I wish there was just that one moment of being sinister, where like he was in control of like the fleet, just that one moment where he's just like, yes, blow them up. Just one smile, one little thing like that. That's all I wanted out of him. Like you said, you do have some returning characters. Like the biggest one they're promoting in the trailers is Billy D. Williams returns as Lando. But if you were hoping for any of that sort of like Lando charm that he usually had within like Empire and Return of the Jedi, not much of it here. It's mostly just Lando just smiling and Billy D. Williams being like, "Hey, I'm in another Star Wars film again. How do you like that?" So that's great. I'm happy to see Billy D. Williams again. I just wish he had more to do. Because like this cast is overstuffed here, and we barely have time to touch on a lot that's going on here. Pretty much like Kelly Marie Tran's character of Rose Tico is pretty much just like pushed into the background. You would think there'd be some relationship that would develop between her and Finn, but it feels way in the background here, like it's barely even present. It doesn't build on everything that like The Last Jedi and even parts of like The Force Awakens had established here. That it just kind of takes, it just feels like this took like the easy way out here. there are some interesting elements to it. Like I said, I love the thematic aspects that it sets up here, and that it does ask some deeper questions about nature versus nurture, the philosophy of the Jedi, what it means to be good, what it means to be bad, questioning your place in the universe. All big questions, but they're all just kind of given kind of generic, kind of like resolves and answers by the end here. I don't know, it felt like just watching kind of like a standard adventure film here. And it's like, standard adventure film where you get like a huge exposition dump and then maybe some little moments of character here along the way. And it's like, I don't know, should a Star Wars film really feel like this? Should it really just feel this routine of just, the just starship battles and then general Jedi babblings about the Force and and constant talk of like searching for MacGuffins and beacons and hidden armadas and hidden homeworlds? Like, I don't know, maybe I thought that there was more to Star Wars than this. So I don't know. I was very, very underwhelmed by the film. There were aspects of it I did like the thematic elements. I did like some of the visuals were pretty cool. But in comparison to like The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, which set up a lot of interesting elements, did a lot of cool stuff with the characters, and played with like the Star Wars mythos in such a unique and interesting way, as well as setting up this great mystery within Rey, it feels like just when we come to the end here, it just kind of ends not so much with like a whimper, but kind of more like a thud. It pains me to say this, but this is definitely the weakest entry of this new Star Wars trilogy. And I guess maybe, I guess it set expectations so high within it that I guess maybe it couldn't have been that good. I mean, it feels like it's got all these lofty ambitions, and it kind of just glazes over them with not horrible, but just kind of milquetoast answers to it. I mean, I guess it depends like how much you're a fan of just like Star Wars, where you just enjoy like like the sight of like these vast armadas going into battle and seeing all these characters again for like the final time, like getting to see Billy D. Williams again, getting to see more of C-3PO and Leia and Luke and all these other characters we've come to know. But it just kind of feels like more of a reunion than actually weaving something new with these characters, which is kind of sad to say. It just kind of feels like everything wraps up a little bit too nice and neat for this type of story. It feels like, I mean, if I wrote this in my review, if The Last Jedi was the big cage rattler of this new Star Wars trilogy, The Rise of Skywalker is the most timid. It just holds that cage, make sure it doesn't shake, make sure no one gets all hot and bothered by it, and keeps everything just safe. It just feels like, more nostalgic wonderment and a reunion, more of Star Trek stuff than the Star Trek sensation that we've come to like from this, that we've come to like from Star Wars in general. That's what's made the best Star Wars films stick out here, is that there's a greater emphasis on character and their journey. I think George Lucas said at one point, it's not just about laser swords and starship battles. It's about something bigger than that. And it just kind of feels like those bigger and grander aspects are just kind of there and not really explored very deeply. So a bit of a disappointing film, but what can I say? That's the way it goes. We not every Star Wars. We got to get used to the fact that not every Star Wars film is always going to appeal to us. I think for the fans who are heavily invested in Star Wars and really enjoy seeing more of the nostalgia trip on screen, the nostalgia trip on screen, I think they're going to enjoy this film most. But I think for those who are seeking more of a bigger focus on the thematic elements and touching a lot more on what The Last Jedi had to offer, they're going to be pretty dismayed by this film. So, for Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, 2.5 out of 5 stars.